He grabbed her by the collar and yanked her off her feet 1 second before 40 tons of steel and concrete turned the space she was standing in into a grave. No warning, no time to think. Just instinct muscle and a man nobody had ever bothered to look at twice. She screamed. He didn't. And when the dust finally settled, when the coughing stopped and the ringing in her ears faded, Victoria Blackwell, one of the most powerful CEOs in America, looked up into the eyes of a janitor covered in blood and realized she had no idea who just saved her life. But she was about to find out. The morning Liam Carter almost died for a woman who didn't know his name started like every other morning for the past 3 years. 5:47 a.m. Alarm. Dark bedroom. The sound of Emma turning over in the next room. The soft creak of her mattress that Liam had memorized the way some men memorize scripture. He lay there for exactly 12 seconds. He always counted, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a hand. Then he sat up, put his feet on the cold floor, and got to work. That was the whole secret of surviving as far as Liam could tell. Not happiness, not hope, just movement, just the next thing. He made oatmeal with brown sugar because Emma liked it sweet. He packed her lunch turkey sandwich apple slices, a folded note that said, "You're the best thing I ever built." He laid out her school clothes on the chair by the door, then pulled on his own uniform. Dark gray pants, dark gray shirt. The small Blackwell Construction logo stitched above the left breast pocket. He was out the door by 6:30. The Horizon Tower job site was already buzzing by the time Liam rolled up in his 2009 Silverado. The truck had 214,000 miles on it, a crack in the windshield that he'd been meaning to fix since September, and a faded parking pass taped to the dash that granted him access to Lot C, the one reserved for maintenance and labor. Not executives, not engineers. Maintenance and labor. He grabbed his gear bag, nodded at the security guard at the gate, a big guy named Roy, who always had coffee breath and a kind word, and walked onto the site. Horizon Tower was supposed to be the crown jewel of Blackwell Enterprises. 42 floors of glass and steel rising out of the east end of downtown, a monument to ambition and capital. The kind of building that ends up on magazine covers and architectural websites with headlines like, "The future has arrived." Liam had worked on buildings like this before. A long time ago, in a different life, he hadn't just worked on them, he'd designed them. But that was before. He didn't let himself think about before. His job today was simple. Check the service corridors on floors 12 through 18, replace 2 faulty exit signs, patch a section of subflooring near the freight elevator on 14, and keep his head down. Keep your head down, Liam. His supervisor, a wiry man named Dale, had said it to him on his first day. Not cruelly, almost fatherly. "This ain't the place to have opinions. You keep your head down, do the work, cash the check, go home." Liam had nodded. He was good at keeping his head down. But old habits die hard. And Liam Carter had spent 15 years looking up at drawings, at load calculations, at the invisible skeleton of steel that kept enormous structures from folding back into the earth. His eyes still moved the way an engineer's eyes move. Cataloging, measuring, questioning. So when he stepped off the service elevator onto the 14th floor and glanced out through the open framework toward the east scaffolding rig, the one that serviced the exterior facade work, he wasn't looking for anything. He saw it anyway. The scaffolding on the east side was a 3-tier system, each tier capable of supporting roughly 2,000 pounds. It was the kind of rig Liam had specified on a dozen projects. He knew every bolt pattern, every stress point, every failure mode. And something was wrong. He couldn't have explained it in words fast enough. It wasn't one thing. It was a combination, the way the second-tier crossbeam was sitting 3 degrees off. True, the way the anchor bolts on the northeast corner were carrying load they weren't designed to carry. The way the whole system was breathing wrong under the wind pressure coming off the river. He stopped walking. "Hey." He stepped to the edge of the floor opening, looked down at the first-tier platform. 2 workers were up there running cable. "Hey, off the rig. Get off the rig now. The closer worker looked up annoyed. The hell are you talking about? That northeast anchor is failing. Get off. Now. Man, I don't know who you are, but this ain't your... Now. Something in his voice, something that didn't belong to a janitor, something older and harder made the man move. Both workers scrambled off the first tier and onto the main floor platform, just as Liam was already moving, already running, because he'd also seen something they hadn't. On the second tier, 20 feet above, there was a woman in a white hard hat and a charcoal blazer who had absolutely no business being on an active exterior scaffold without a harness, and she was walking directly toward the northeast corner. Later, Liam would not be able to tell you exactly how he got up there. He remembered grabbing a vertical stanchion and pulling himself up. He remembered the wind. He remembered the sound the structure made, a deep, metallic groan that traveled up through his boots and into his chest, like a warning from the building itself. He remembered the woman's face when she turned and saw him coming. Confusion, then irritation, then something close to anger. What is... He didn't say a word. He grabbed the lapel of her blazer in one fist, her forearm in the other, and pulled. He didn't pull gently. This wasn't a dance. He yanked her backward off her feet with everything he had, turning his own body to shield her as the northeast corner anchor gave way with a sound like a gunshot. The whole second tier dropped. Not slowly, not cinematically. Fast, the way real structural failures happen, with no grace and no warning. Just physics doing what physics does. 4,200 pounds of steel grating pipe scaffolding and equipment cratered into the first tier below, blew through that platform and hit the ground 20 feet down in an explosion of dust and noise that shook the entire east face of the building. The shockwave knocked Liam sideways. He hit the floor hard, one shoulder taking most of it, and the woman landed half on top of him, her hard hat spinning away across the concrete. Silence. Not real silence. There was debris still falling, people shouting somewhere below, an alarm beginning to sound. But in the bubble of the next 3 or 4 seconds, it was the closest thing to silence Liam had felt in a long time. Then she made a sound. Not a scream, more like a word that didn't quite form, a breath forced out by shock and adrenaline. She was pressing her palms flat against the floor, like she needed to prove the floor was still there. Liam sat up slowly. His shoulder was on fire. There was blood somewhere, his forehead, he thought, from a piece of debris. He could feel it running down the side of his face. "Are you hurt?" he said. She turned and looked at him. He had never seen eyes go through that many things that quickly. Terror, disbelief, the slow, strange return of consciousness after the body has decided it's about to die. Her hair had come loose. There was dust in it. Her blazer was torn at the shoulder where he'd grabbed her. She was without question the most composed person he had ever seen fall apart. She started. "Are you hurt?" he said again. Steady, focused. The way he used to talk on job sites when a situation required calm, because calm was the only useful currency. She blinked. "No, I don't think no. Can you stand?" She pushed herself up without waiting for help. He noticed that. She got her feet under her and stood on her own, and the first thing she did after standing was straighten the sleeve of her blazer. Even torn, even covered in dust. Interesting, some part of him noted. Around them, the site had erupted. Workers were running, supervisors were shouting into radios, someone was calling for a medic. A foreman Liam recognized, a stocky man named Pete, came sprinting across the floor and pulled up short when he saw them. "Jesus, are you?" Pete looked back and forth between them. "What happened?" "The east scaffold failed," Liam said. "Northeast anchor. I've been watching that corner for 2 days. Whoever signed off on that installation needs to..." Hold on. Pete held up both hands. He was looking at the woman now, the recognition hitting him like cold water. Ms. Blackwell, are you all right? Do you need..." "I'm fine, Pete." Her voice was back. All the way back. Like a curtain coming down or a curtain going up. Liam wasn't sure which. controlled, measured with just enough edge to remind everyone present of the organizational chart. What I need is for someone to tell me how that scaffold was cleared for use this morning. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We'll do a full... And I need someone to tell me who this man is. The word "this man" landed differently than she probably intended it. Not dismissive, more like she was filing something marking a category she hadn't had before. She was looking at Liam directly now. He was still crouched where he'd landed, pressing the back of his wrist against his forehead to check the bleeding. Not performing modesty, just taking stock. He looked up at her. She looked like the kind of woman who had been photographed 1,000 times and had learned to arrange her face accordingly. High cheekbones, dark eyes that were cataloging him the same way he'd cataloged the scaffolding, noting stress points, measuring load capacity. "Who are you?" she said. He stood, wiped the blood off his hand onto his pants, glanced down once at the destruction below, the tangled wreckage of the scaffold, the lucky and total absence of bodies in it, and then back at her. "Nobody important, ma'am." She blinked, just once and fast, like the answer had surprised her. "What's your name?" "Liam." "Liam what?" A beat. Around them, people were still moving, still shouting. A medic was pushing through the crowd toward them. Pete was already on his radio. The whole organized chaos of an emergency was unfolding, and somehow the two of them were standing slightly outside of it, like they were in a different frequency. "Carter," he said. "Liam Carter." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, not challenging, more like she was doing something internally that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with what had just happened to her. Then the medic reached them, and the moment broke. "Sir, you're bleeding. I need you to..." "Check her first," Liam said, nodding at Victoria. "She took most of the impact when she fell." "I told you I'm..." Victoria started. "Ma'am." He said it quietly, without apology. "Your left wrist. You landed on it." She stopped, looked down at her wrist, flexed her hand and couldn't hide the flinch. A small silence. "Fine," she said. To the medic, "Check it." Liam stepped back, letting the medic move in. Pete materialized at his elbow. "Man," Pete said low and urgent. "Do you understand what just happened? Do you understand who that is? I know who she is. She's Victoria Blackwell. The Victoria Blackwell. She owns this project. She owns half the..." "I know, Pete." "You just..." Pete stopped, looked at the wreckage below, looked back at Liam. "You probably just saved her life." Liam didn't answer. He was watching the medic examine Victoria's wrist, watching the way she kept her expression neutral, even when the probing clearly hurt, watching the way her eyes moved across the chaos of the site with something that looked less like fear and more like calculation. She's already working the problem, he thought, already figuring out what this means, already moving. He recognized that mode. He'd lived in it for years back before everything fell apart. "Go get cleaned up," Pete said, quieter now. "I'll handle the reports. Your name doesn't have to be in any of this if you don't want it to be." Liam looked at him. "Why would I want that?" "Because..." Pete hesitated. "Because people like her, Liam. People like her, they have ways of making things complicated, even for the people who help them, especially for the people who help them." Liam thought about Emma, about the folded note in her lunchbox, about the 2009 Silverado in Lot C, and the water stain on the ceiling, and the 12 seconds every morning between the alarm and the floor. "Complicated doesn't scare me anymore," he said. He picked up his gear bag, dusted off his shirt with the kind of deliberate calm that looks like indifference but is actually something much harder won. As he turned to walk toward the service elevator, he heard her voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Carter?" He stopped. He didn't turn around right away. Just stop the way you stop when you hear something you weren't expecting. Then he turned. She was standing with the medic still holding her wrist, a white gauze wrap half applied, and she was looking at him from across 20 feet of dusty concrete with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said. No performance in it. No public relations warmth. No executive class graciousness. Just 2 words direct and unvarnished, like she'd had to dig for them, and was surprised they were there. Liam nodded once. Then he got in the elevator and went back to work. By the time he finished patching the subflooring on, 14, word had spread through the site. The way word always spreads on job sites, fast, loud, and only about 60% accurate. By the workers' version, Liam had fought through a collapsing building, bare-handed, to pull Victoria Blackwell out from under a mountain of steel. By the foreman's version, the scaffold failure was a freak accident, and some maintenance guy had been in the right place at the right time. Liam's version was the simplest: he'd seen something wrong, and he'd done something about it. That was all. He ate lunch alone in the Silverado, which was also his version of most things. Ham sandwich, thermos of black coffee. Radio on low, some afternoon talk show he wasn't really listening to. He propped his arm against the window and watched the east face of the building where the scaffold had been, where now there was only open air and the ghost of catastrophe. His shoulder ached where he'd taken the fall. His forehead had stopped bleeding, but it was going to bruise. He'd told the site medic he was fine, and the medic had given him the look that medics give people who are clearly not fine, but are also clearly not going to admit it. He thought about the Northeast anchor, about the installation report he'd tried to flag to Dale 3 days ago, about the way Dale had looked at him with that patient, slightly pitying expression and said, "Liam, you're maintenance. You report trip hazards and busted lights. You're not here to second-guess the engineers. You're not here to second-guess the engineers." He took a long drink of coffee. The thing about falling from a great height, not literally, but in the way that life sometimes drops you, is that it doesn't kill the instincts. It just makes them embarrassing. Liam still knew exactly what he was looking at every time he walked onto a job site. He still saw the angles, the load paths, the potential failure cascades. The knowledge didn't go away just because nobody wanted to hear it from a man in a maintenance uniform. He'd stopped saying it out loud. Mostly, not here to second-guess the engineers. He finished his lunch, folded the wax paper, got out of the truck and went back inside. At 4:45 he clocked out, drove to Emma's school and picked her up. She was 11 and she had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of dark brown that looked almost black in certain light, and she had Liam's stubbornness, which he considered alternately his greatest gift to her and his deepest apology. She climbed into the passenger seat, threw her backpack in the back and immediately said, "What happened to your face?" He touched the bruise forming on his temple. "Had a long day." "That's not an answer." "Small accident on the site. Nothing serious." She studied him with the forensic intensity that 11-year-olds reserve for things they know adults are downplaying. "Did someone get hurt?" "Almost," he said. "But no." She seemed to accept this, turned to look out the window as he pulled into traffic. Then, "I got an A on my math test." "Yeah. 102. There was extra credit." "That's my girl." She smiled the way she did when she was trying not to smile and sideways, like she was keeping it contained. She had her mother's smile too. He never told her that, because it would have made them both cry, and they'd done enough of that. They got home. He made pasta. She talked about school, something complicated, involving her best friend Jada and a boy named Tyler, who was technically nobody, but actually the worst. Liam listened the way he always listened, completely without offering solutions, because what Emma needed was a place to put the noise, not a man with a wrench trying to fix it. Later, after she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and a legal pad he hadn't opened in months. He pulled it open to a blank page, picked up a pen, and for the first time in a very long time, Liam Carter started drawing load calculations. Not for anything, not for anyone, just because the building was still in his hands. And the building was wrong, and he could feel it the way you can feel a bad tooth, a low, persistent wrong that didn't go away no matter how hard you tried to ignore it. He drew for 2 hours. What he found on that legal pad in the quiet of his kitchen, in a small apartment that smelled like pasta and dish soap and his daughter's shampoo, what he found should have made him close the pad and go to bed. Instead, it made his blood run cold. 3 time zones away, in a corner office on the 38th floor of Blackwell Tower, Victoria Blackwell sat at her desk with a glass of untouched scotch and a name she couldn't stop turning over in her mind. Liam Carter. She'd had her assistant run it before she'd even left the site. What came back wasn't nothing. It was the opposite of nothing. She leaned back in her chair, looking at the file on her screen, and for a moment, just a moment, she let herself think about the sound the scaffold had made, the way the world had simply removed itself from under her feet, and the grip of a hand that had come out of nowhere and refused to let her go. Nobody important. She picked up the scotch, set it back down. We'll see about that, Mr. Carter. The next morning, Liam's legal pad was still on the kitchen table when Emma came out for breakfast. She looked at it the way kids look at things that don't belong, the way she used to look at the half-finished bourbon glass her father left on the counter in the bad months with a careful measuring silence that she was too young to know was heartbreaking. "What's that?" she asked. "Math," Liam said. "Your math or work math?" He poured her orange juice. "Does it matter?" She sat down and looked at the pad more carefully. Numbers. Diagrams load path arrows that Liam had sketched from memory, the skeleton of Horizon Tower rendered in blue ballpoint on yellow paper, with 3 circled sections and notations in the tight compressed handwriting he'd developed over 15 years of working in the margins of blueprints. "It looks important," Emma said. "Eat your oatmeal." She ate, but she kept glancing at the pad with those eyes that missed nothing, and Liam folded it shut and slid it to the far end of the table, and neither of them said anything else about it. But she was right. It was important. The kind of important that sits at the bottom of your stomach and doesn't digest. What Liam had found the night before, working from memory, from 3 years of walking that building's service corridors, from the instincts of a man who had once been paid a great deal of money to find exactly these kinds of problems, wasn't just a bad anchor bolt and a lazy installation crew. It was systemic. It was intentional. And if he was right, Horizon Tower wasn't just behind schedule and over budget. It was a building that was being designed from the inside out to fail. He drove to the site in the early gray light and sat in Lot C for 10 minutes before going in. The east scaffold was gone, replaced by yellow caution tape and a cluster of hard hats from the site safety team doing their incident review. The workers were quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that follows near misses men who'd been on that rig the day before, or almost had been walking around with the specific sobriety of people who have briefly made eye contact with their own mortality. Liam clocked in, nodded at Roy, and went straight to Dale's office. Dale was a practical man in his mid-50s, with a gray mustache and the permanent squint of someone who'd spent 3 decades working outdoors. He was reading an incident report when Liam knocked on the open door, and he looked up with the particular expression of a man who'd been expecting this visit and hadn't been looking forward to it. "Carter, I need 5 minutes." Dale set the report down, gestured at the chair across the desk with his coffee mug. Liam sat. "First," Dale said, "I'm going to tell you that what you did yesterday was either the bravest thing or the stupidest thing I've seen on a job site in 30 years, and I'm not entirely sure which. I need to show you something." "Second," Dale continued, like Liam hadn't spoken, "I'm going to tell you that the corporate office called me at 7 this morning. Apparently Ms. Blackwell wants to personally review the incident report before it's filed, which has never happened in my experience, and I've been on Blackwell sites for 11 years. Dale." Liam put the legal pad on the desk, opened it to the first page. "Look at this." Dale looked at it for a long moment. His expression didn't change. Then it did just slightly, just around the eyes. The squint deepened. "Where'd you get this?" "I drew it. From memory. From what I've seen walking these corridors for 3 years. "You drew a structural analysis of Horizon Tower." "Yes." From memory. I used to be good at this. Dale sat back. He knew enough of Liam's background, or thought he did, to understand that the understatement was load-bearing. He picked up the pad and turned to the second page, then the third, his jaw getting tighter with every page. These circled sections, he said, column connections on floors 8, 15, and 22. The load transfer to the core shear wall is off, not by a little by enough that a significant lateral load event, seismic or wind, would initiate a progressive failure sequence. Dale put the pad down carefully, like it was something that could detonate. He looked at Liam for a long moment. Outside the office, the site was waking up, machinery starting, voices carrying the rhythmic percussion of construction resuming around the hollow space where the east scaffold used to be. Liam, Dale said, you know what happens if I walk this up the chain? The building gets fixed. What happens to you if I walk this up the chain? Without a license? Without standing? As a maintenance worker who filled out his own structural analysis on a legal pad? Liam looked at him steadily. I know. They'll bury it. Or they'll bury you. Probably both. Probably. So why are you sitting in my office at 7 in the morning? Because there are 400 people working in that building every day, Liam said. And my daughter's school is 6 blocks from here. Dale was quiet for a long time. He looked at the pad. He looked at Liam. He looked out the window at the site, at the workers moving in the early morning light, with the easy confidence of men who believed the structure above them had been built correctly. I'll make some calls, Dale said finally. Quietly. Liam stood. That's all I'm asking. Don't get your hopes up. I stopped doing that a while ago. He picked up the legal pad and walked out. What Liam didn't know as he went back to his maintenance rounds that morning, replacing a broken light panel on 16, clearing a drain blockage on the service corridor of 12, was that 42 floors above his head, in the glass and steel executive suite that sat like a crown on Blackwell Tower across the city, Victoria Blackwell was having a conversation that involved his name. She'd called Marcus Hale into her office at 8 sharp. Marcus was Blackwell Enterprises' CFO, a tall, carefully assembled man in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the practiced warmth of someone who'd learned long ago that being liked was a competitive advantage. He had a handshake that said, "Trust me," and eyes that said something slightly different to anyone paying close enough attention. Victoria had been paying attention for a while. She just hadn't had a reason to act on it. "The incident report," she said without preamble, as Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk, with the ease of someone who believed himself to be a trusted intimate. "Already reviewed it," Marcus said. "Mechanical failure. The anchor installation was third-party contracted. We're looking at liability claims against, I want the original installation sign-offs." A small pause. "Of course. I'll have them pulled." "Today, Marcus." "Victoria, the legal team would probably recommend we route this through today." She looked at him with the full, unblinking weight of her attention, and Marcus Hale, who was not easily made uncomfortable, shifted in his chair by approximately 2 degrees. "I'll get them to you by end of day," he said. "Good." She looked back at her screen, which was from Marcus's angle unreadable. "That's all?" He stood, smoothed his jacket. At the door, he paused, the practiced, natural pause of a man who wanted the last word without appearing to want it. "You doing okay? After yesterday, that had to be." "I'm fine, Marcus." "It was a hell of a thing. Lucky that maintenance guy was there." She didn't answer. He waited. She said nothing. He left. Victoria watched the door close. She picked up the file her assistant had compiled on Liam Carter, 12 pages, because her assistant was thorough, and read a section she'd already read twice. Liam Carter, formerly Principal Engineer Carter, and Hollis Structural Engineering. Licensed PE in 6 states. Lead designer on the Meridian Complex, the Harlow Bridge Project, the Sinclair Federal Building Expansion. Winner of the ASCE Excellence in Structural Engineering Award in 2016. Voluntarily surrendered engineering license in 2019 following the death of his wife Rachel Carter in a vehicle accident. No subsequent engineering employment. Current employment: Blackwell Construction, maintenance technician. She set the file down. She picked it up again. Voluntarily surrendered. Not stripped. Not disciplined. He'd handed it in himself, like a man emptying his pockets before stepping out of a room he didn't plan to return to. She thought about the way he'd looked at the scaffolding. The way he'd moved, not panicked, not reckless, but with the specific economy of motion that belongs to people who understand how things work at a mechanical level. The way he'd told her to let the medic check her wrist before she'd even registered the pain. Nobody important. She'd dealt with important people her entire adult life. She'd been raised by one, been shaped by one. Her father, Richard Blackwell, who'd built this company from a two-man construction outfit into a billion-dollar enterprise, and who had also been the coldest, most transactional human being she'd ever known, which was saying something in the world she'd inhabited since inheriting his desk and his enemies. She knew exactly what important people looked like, the ones who needed you to know it, the ones who carried it like a weapon. Liam Carter had saved her life and then gone back to work. She opened her calendar, looked at the week ahead, made a decision. Dale found Liam on the 16th floor at noon. "Corporate wants to talk to you," he said. Liam was halfway through reattaching a ceiling panel and didn't stop working. About yesterday. I already gave my statement to the site safety team. This isn't the site safety team." Dale paused in the particular way of a man choosing his words with care. "It's her assistant, Ms. Blackwell's, asking if you can come in Thursday morning, to the corporate office." Liam put the panel in place, pressed it flush, tested the seal, set his tools down and looked at Dale. "Why?" She didn't say specifically, but my read. Dale hesitated. "She's not done with you, Liam. Whatever that means." Liam picked up his tools. "What do you think it means?" "I think it means she looked you up. I think she knows who you used to be." Dale held his gaze. "I think you should be careful." "Of what?" "Of people who see your value the second it becomes useful to them." It was the most Dale had said to him about anything personal in 3 years, and Liam felt the weight of it. Dale wasn't a subtle man, but he was a fair one, and fair men earned their cautions. "I'll think about it," Liam said. "That's probably smarter than yes or no." He thought about it that night while Emma did homework at the kitchen table, and he washed dishes, which was where he did most of his serious thinking. The hot water, the repetitive motion, the quiet house, it had a confessional quality, those dishes. Like the act of cleaning things gave your mind permission to surface the dirt in itself. The legal pad was back on the table. Emma had moved it to make room for her textbooks, and hadn't asked about it again, which meant she was thinking about it, which was worse. "Dad," she said without looking up from her history book. "Yeah." "Are you going to do something about it?" He turned off the water, dried his hands on the dish towel. "About what?" Now she looked up. "Whatever's on the pad." He looked at her. She looked at him. 11 years old, with her mother's eyes and his stubbornness, and a capacity for directness that both terrified and comforted him. "I don't know yet," he said. "It's making you quiet," she said. "The bad kind of quiet, not thinking quiet, scared quiet." "I'm not scared." "Dad." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Looked at the pad, then at her. "You know what I used to do before I was here. You were an engineer. I designed buildings, figured out how to make them stand up, how to make them safe." He paused. "There's a building, the one I work in, and I think it has a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that could hurt people." Emma processed this with a gravity that no 11-year-old should have, but that she'd developed the hard way, the way all the most important things get developed. She put her pencil down very deliberately. "Then you have to fix it," she said. Right. It's complicated, Em. I'm not an engineer anymore. I don't have the standing to. I don't care about standing, she said flatly. If it's dangerous, and you know it's dangerous, and you don't say something, then what does that make you? He didn't answer. She picked her pencil back up and went back to her homework, and the sentence sat between them in the kitchen air, like something structural, a load-bearing thing, a thing you couldn't just remove without the whole roof coming down. He pulled the legal pad toward him and looked at it for a long time. She called, he said finally. The CEO, Victoria Blackwell. She wants to meet. Emma didn't look up. Are you going? I don't know. Dad, are you going? A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Thursday morning, he wore the one good shirt he owned, a dark blue Oxford he'd bought for a job interview 2 years ago that he hadn't gotten. Clean jeans, clean boots. He left Emma with his neighbor Mrs. Pacheco, who was 68, formidable, and the closest thing Emma had to a grandmother, and who pressed a foil-wrapped plate of pan dulce into his hands and told him to eat something before he went anywhere. He ate in the Silverado parked half a block from Blackwell Tower, watching the building's entrance, the way he used to watch structures under load, reading it, trying to understand what was actually happening inside. The lobby was exactly what corporate lobbies always were, a performance of solidity and permanence. Marble floors, cathedral ceilings, the kind of engineered grandeur that was meant to communicate one thing and one thing only: we are not going anywhere. The receptionist called him by name when he walked in. That bothered him slightly, the preparation of it, the message it sent. We've been expecting you. We know who you are. You're already inside the machine. He took the elevator to 38. The assistant, young efficient with the polished affect of someone trained to make uncertainty feel like welcome, brought him to a waiting area with a view of the skyline and offered him coffee, which he declined, and water, which he accepted. He sat. He waited. He looked out at the city and found himself, without meaning to, calculating sightlines to Horizon Tower, identifying its silhouette against the other buildings, noting the way the upper floors caught the morning light. Mr. Carter? He stood. Victoria Blackwell was in a gray dress today. No blazer, no hard hat, no dust. She looked the way she was clearly designed to look, in this context authoritative, composed, the embodiment of every decision that had built this company. Her left wrist had a thin brace on it that she was clearly pretending was not there. Ms. Blackwell. Thank you for coming. You asked. The corner of her mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, not quite its opposite. She gestured toward her office, and he followed her in. It was a large room, but she'd arranged it to feel like a room where work actually happened, rather than a throne room. Papers on the desk, 2 monitors, a whiteboard along one wall with what looked like project timelines written in blue marker. He noticed she'd positioned her chair so that it faced the door, not the view. A person who wanted to see what was coming, not be distracted by what was already behind her. Sit down, she said. I'm not going to make this a formal thing. I don't have patience for formal when I can be direct. He sat. Then be direct. She looked at him for a moment with that same cataloging expression, that measuring of structural integrity, and then she opened the folder on her desk, turned it around to face him. His own face looked back at him from a photocopy of an industry publication profile 2017, back when he'd still been the kind of person whose picture ended up in industry publications. Principal engineer, she said. 15 years, 6 state licenses, 3 award-winning projects, one of the most respected structural engineering firms in the Mid-Atlantic. She looked up from the file. And then nothing. He met her gaze. My wife died. The directness of it landed in the room with weight. She didn't flinch, but she paused, a real pause, not a social one. I know, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I don't need the file explained back to me. No. She closed it. You're right. Let me tell you what I actually want to say. She leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. You saved my life 2 days ago. Not by accident, not by luck. You saw something that every certified engineer on that site had missed, and you acted on it without hesitating. And you did it as a man whose name isn't on any of the paperwork. He said nothing. I want to bring you on as a consulting structural engineer on the Horizon Tower project. Outside the existing team, independent review capacity, full access, full documentation, direct line to me. The room was quiet for a moment. You can't, he said. I don't have a license. You surrendered yours voluntarily. There's a reinstatement pathway. I have lawyers who can accelerate the timeline if the individual in question has a demonstrated record and a sponsoring firm. She paused. We would be the sponsoring firm. He looked at her steadily. Why? Because the scaffold that failed wasn't an accident. The words settled in the room like something being placed on a scale. He watched her face say what she wasn't quite saying yet, the contained urgency behind the composure, the thing that was driving this meeting that had nothing to do with gratitude. You know, he said. I suspect, she said carefully, and I need someone who knows what to look for. Someone outside the existing structure, someone whose name isn't already on the installation reports. She held his gaze. Someone who has nothing to lose. He thought about Emma saying, "Then what does that make you?" He thought about the water stain on the ceiling and the legal pad and 3 years of keeping his head down and watching things be built wrong by people who knew better. I have one condition, he said. She waited. My daughter. Emma. She's 11. She's... He stopped. Organized himself. If this gets complicated and you know it's going to get complicated, I need to know she's covered. School health security, not charity. A real arrangement documented separate from whatever happens to me, whatever comes out of this. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. He couldn't read what she was thinking, and he'd gotten reasonably good at reading people over the years. That's not what I expected you to ask for, she said. You expected money. Most people would have. I don't need money, he said. I need my daughter to be all right if this blows up in my face. She looked at him, really looked at him with something that wasn't calculation for once, something that was closer to recognition, the particular kind that happens between two people who've each lost something they were never supposed to lose. I'll have it drafted today, she said. He nodded. Then I'll start Monday. She extended her hand across the desk. He reached over and shook it a firm grip. Brief, the handshake of two people entering an arrangement they both understood would cost them something before it was over. He was halfway to the door when she said, Mr. Carter. He turned. The scaffold, she said. You knew it was going to fail before you came up there. Yes. You'd flagged it before, to your supervisor. 3 days prior. She absorbed this without any visible change in expression. And you came up anyway. Someone was on it. Most people would have shouted from below and let someone else handle it. He looked at her with the level, undecorated honesty of a man who'd stopped performing things for other people a long time ago. I'm not most people, he said, and I don't think you actually believe I am, or I wouldn't be standing in this office. She held his gaze for a moment. No, she said. And the word had an edge of something that wasn't quite admission and wasn't quite respect, but was somewhere in the territory between them. I don't believe that. He left. In the elevator down the city, spread out through the glass wall around him, gray and enormous, and indifferent, the way cities always were, full of things being built and things being hidden, and the vast, complicated machinery of human ambition grinding forward. Liam looked at his reflection in the elevator glass. Saw a man in a clean blue shirt holding a foil-wrapped plate of Pandolts going back down into a world that was about to get very loud. He thought about the building, about what he'd found, about what he hadn't told Victoria Blackwell yet, because there were layers beneath the scaffold, failure layers he'd traced on that legal pad and his kitchen layers that pointed not toward accident or negligence, but toward something deliberate, something that had a signature if you knew how to read it. The elevator hit the lobby. The doors opened. Liam Carter walked out into the morning. For the first time in 3 years, he walked like an engineer. Monday came the way Mondays always came for Liam, whether he was ready or not. He dropped Emma at school 20 minutes early, which she complained about with the focused energy of someone who had nothing more pressing to complain about, and he was grateful for it. Grateful for the normalcy of her protest. Grateful that her biggest problem on this particular Monday morning was 20 extra minutes on the school steps with her library book. "I'll pick you up at 4, he said. "You always pick me up at 4. Then nothing's changed. She gave him the look, the squinting forensic look, and got out of the truck. He watched her walk up the steps before he pulled away, which he always did, which she had long since stopped commenting on because she understood it wasn't something he could help. He drove to Blackwell Tower. This time he parked in the visitor structure, not Lot C. It was a small thing, but it felt different under his hands. The steering wheel, the gear shift, the weight of the truck on different ground. Victoria's assistant, whose name he'd learned was Diane, met him in the lobby with a badge, a key card, and a visitor packet that had been repackaged as a consultant welcome folder. Same thing, different label. He appreciated the efficiency, if not the window dressing. "Ms. Blackwell asked me to get you settled in the project room before she joins you," Diane said, moving through the lobby with the practiced speed of someone for whom the building was an extension of her own nervous system. "She's finishing a call with the city planning office." "Trouble?" Diane gave him a look that was professionally smooth but not quite opaque. "There's always trouble with city planning." She took him to the 14th floor, not the executive suite, but the project floor, where the architecture and engineering teams worked. A glass-walled room near the back had been set aside. Inside a large table, 2 monitors, a printer, and 6 thick project binders stacked with the careful precision of someone who knew their contents were important. He set his bag down, opened the first binder. He was 40 pages in by the time Victoria walked through the door. She was moving the way she moved on a site with purpose and without ceremony, coffee in hand, phone already pocketed. She looked at the binders he'd already spread across the table, at the pages he'd flagged with the yellow sticky notes Diane had left in a small pile at the legal pad he'd produced from his bag and was already 3 pages into. "You didn't wait," she said. "You said full access." She sat across from him, set down her coffee. "What have you found?" He looked at her directly. This was the moment he'd been thinking about since the elevator ride on Thursday. How much to say in what order at what speed. Information had weight and direction, and he'd learned the hard way that dumping too much of it too fast on a person who wasn't ready for the load could do structural damage of its own kind. But she wasn't most people. He'd established that. The scaffold failure, he said, was not the problem. It was a symptom. Of what? Whoever has been approving materials on this project has been substituting spec. He turned the legal pad toward her, showing her the numbered points he'd laid out in the kitchen 3 nights ago, now expanded with reference to the actual project documentation. The column connection hardware on floors 815 and 22, the installation reports show grade A 325 bolts. The actual torque specs on the installation logs are consistent with A 307. That's a rated capacity difference of roughly 40%. She looked at the pad. He watched her absorbing it, not panicking, not deflecting, just processing. You can tell bolt grades from torque records. If you know what you're looking at, the installation crew would have known they were putting in the wrong hardware. The foreman who signed off would have known. The materials procurement log would show the purchase order that's in here. He tapped one of the open binders. But someone above the foreman level would have had to approve the substitution on the budget side. You don't save money on structural hardware by accident. Somebody chose to. She was quiet for a moment. How long has this been going on? based on what I can trace through these records since approximately floor 4. Floor 4. She repeated it like she was testing the weight of it. That's the entire building. Structurally relevant portions of it. Yes. She put her coffee down. She pressed her palms flat on the table, which he'd noticed was something she did when she was applying pressure to herself, keeping herself grounded by applying counterpressure the way a beam holds its shape under load, by resisting equally from both sides. "Who signed the materials procurement approvals?" she asked, though from the careful flatness in her voice, he suspected she already had a candidate. "The CFO's office," he said. "Everything above a $30,000 line item on this project routes through Marcus Hale's approval chain." The name settled in the room. Victoria didn't move. She held her own gaze steady in the middle distance for exactly 4 seconds. He counted the way he always counted, and then she looked at him. "I need you to be certain," she said. "Not probable. Not likely. Certain. Give me the original purchase orders and the delivery receipts. Let me cross-reference against the installation logs on every structural tier. I'll give you a full report floor by floor with a confidence level on each finding. How long? A week if I work every day. Less if I can get eyes on the building itself. You'll have full site access. Under the project consulting designation, no one below director level needs to know your background." She paused. "That includes the site teams." He thought about Dale. About the conversation in the small office with the incident report, and the gray mustache and the words, "People who see your value the second it becomes useful to them." He'd been thinking about that more than he wanted to. "Dale knows who I am," he said. "Dale is site supervisor. He reports to the project director who reports to me." Her tone wasn't cold, it was precise. "Dale isn't the problem." "I know he isn't." "Then we're aligned." He nodded. She stood. He thought the meeting was over, and then she stopped at the door and said without turning around, "The document for Emma. Diane has it. It's ready to sign whenever you want." He looked up from the binder. "You had it drafted over the weekend. You said you'd start Monday." She turned her head slightly. "I keep my commitments, Mr. Carter." She walked out. He sat with that for a moment. Then he turned back to the binders, picked up his pen, and went to work. Marcus Hale heard about the consulting engagement at 10:30 that same morning from his deputy, a precise young man named Philip, who had the corporate instinct of a man twice his age and the ethical flexibility that came with proximity to the powerful. "Independent structural review," Philip said, setting the memo on Marcus's desk. "Initiated by Ms. Blackwell directly. Non-disclosure agreement consulting designation, full project access." Marcus read the memo without picking it up. "Who approved this?" "She did. Directly. No board review, no committee. It's within her executive discretionary budget." "Who's the consultant?" "A Liam Carter. He's listed as, I know who he is." Marcus said it the way people say things they wish weren't true. Philip waited. He was good at waiting. It was in Marcus's estimation his most useful quality. "Pull everything we have on Carter," Marcus said. "Employment history on the site. Any incident reports he's named in. Any flags from HR." "Should I?" "Quietly, Philip. Pull it quietly." Philip took the memo off the desk and left. Marcus stood at his window for a long moment, looking at the city. He had a corner office like Victoria, but his faced west rather than east, away from the river, away from Horizon Tower, toward the part of the city where money moved without leaving marks on anything. He picked up his phone, thought about making a call. Put it back down. He was not a man who panicked. He was a man who managed variables, and this was a new variable, and new variables required information before they required action. But he was aware, with the specific awareness of someone who knows where the bodies are buried, that a structural engineer with nothing to lose, and Victoria Blackwell's full access, had just walked into a project he'd spent 18 months very carefully managing. He needed to know exactly what Liam Carter knew, and how fast he was moving. By Wednesday evening, Liam had cross-referenced 40% of the project's structural documentation. He worked in the project room until 6, then brought copies home in his bag, the ones he was legally permitted to take under his consulting agreement, and worked at the kitchen table until Emma went to bed, and then until midnight, and then until the numbers finally blurred and he made himself stop. The picture assembling itself on his legal pads, he was on the third one now, was worse than he'd initially estimated. It wasn't just the bolt grades. It wasn't just the east scaffold anchor. It was the rebar specification on the lower floor core walls, the concrete mix design on the transfer slab at level 10. The weld inspection reports that showed passing grades on connections. He was increasingly certain had never been properly inspected. Layer after layer of substitution and falsification, each one small enough to be explained away as oversight combined into something that was not oversight at all. Horizon Tower, as currently built, was not going to collapse tomorrow. It was not in immediate danger of falling into the street. The human body could have a failing organ for years before the crisis came, and buildings were the same way. The decay could be quiet for a long time. And then, all at once, it was not quiet at all. What Liam was looking at was a building that was engineered to fail under duress. An earthquake, a major wind event, a concentrated load condition nobody had planned for. Something that might happen in 5 years or 15 or 20-something that the responsible parties could plausibly claim no one could have foreseen, and that they themselves would be insulated from by layers of contractors and subcontractors and documentation that pointed everywhere except at the man who'd approved the budget line items. He sat at his kitchen table at 11:30 on Wednesday night with 3 legal pads and a cold cup of coffee, and understood fully and clearly what Marcus Hale had built and why. It wasn't just graft. It wasn't just skimming the materials budget for personal profit, though that was part of it. It was architecture, the architecture of deniability, constructed by someone who'd done this before and intended to keep doing it. Which meant Horizon Tower was not the first. How many others? The thought arrived with a specific weight, the kind that makes you set down whatever's in your hands. How many other buildings? How many other floors with the wrong bolts and the wrong rebar, and the weld inspections that never happened? He did not sleep well that night. Thursday, he found the first piece of direct evidence. It was in the delivery receipts, the physical ones, the ones that came before the digitization of the project records. A stack of paper manifests from the materials warehouse, the kind that forklift operators signed when loads came off trucks. The kind that nobody ever thought to falsify because nobody ever thought anyone would look. The digital system showed grade A325 hardware for the floor 15-column connections. The paper manifest showed a delivery reference number that, when cross-referenced against the supplier's catalog, corresponded to grade A307. Same delivery date, same reference number, different grade. Someone had altered the digital records after the fact. The paper manifests were the original. He photographed everything with his phone, methodically every page in the clear light of the project room table. He made 2 copies on the project printer and sealed them in separate envelopes. One went in his bag. One he locked in the project room filing cabinet with his consultant keycard. Then he called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. "Carter? I have hard evidence. Primary documents. Unaltered." A silence. Not long. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. "Where are you?" "Project room." "Don't go anywhere." She was in the room 11 minutes later, which told him she'd been in the building. She looked at the manifests he laid out on the table, and he walked her through the cross-reference the same way he'd have walked a client through a structural analysis methodically, without drama, just the facts in sequence, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. She didn't interrupt. She just looked and listened, and when he finished, she stood very still at the head of the table with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the way of someone who has just been told what they suspected and finds that being right is worse than being wrong. "He changed the digital records," she said. Not a question. "After the fact. The paper manifests predate the digital entries. The delivery reference numbers match, but the product codes don't. It's not subtle, it's just buried deep enough that no one would dig for it without a specific reason. And the scaffold. If the anchor hardware was sub-spec, the same way the column connections were, then it wasn't a question of if it failed. It was a question of when. He paused. You being on that tier when it happened, was that planned? Were you on the schedule to visit the site that day? She looked at him. My site visits are on the executive calendar, which Marcus Hale has access to. The word access sat between them like something that needed to be diffused before it could be moved. You're saying he knew I'd be there, she said carefully. I'm saying the timing is worth examining. She turned away from the table and walked to the window. He watched her back, the rigidity of it, the contained tension. She was processing something beyond the structural evidence, something personal, and he gave her the space to do it because it was the only useful thing he could offer right now. Marcus has been with this company for 9 years, she said. Not defensively, more like she was laying something down before she picked up something else. My father brought him in. After Richard died, Marcus was one of 2 people on the executive team who stayed. People stay for different reasons, Liam said. She turned back to face him. I know that. Something in her voice had shifted, not harder, but cleaner. The way a voice gets when a person has finished arguing with themselves. What do you need to complete the full report? Access to the original purchase orders going back to floor 1. The supplier contracts. And if you can get me the digital systems audit log, the record of when entries were modified, that's the chain of custody I need to make this airtight. The audit log is in the IT system. I'll need to go around Marcus to get it. If he has access to the modification records, he may also have the ability to purge them. Then it needs to happen fast, and it needs to happen without him knowing we're looking. She nodded. I know someone in IT, someone who reports to the board's audit committee, not to the executive team. She picked up her phone. I'll move on it tonight. He started to collect the manifests. Ms. Blackwell. Victoria, she said, without looking up from her phone. You're consulting for me. We're going to spend a lot of time in difficult rooms together. Ms. Blackwell is going to get exhausting. He paused. Victoria. She looked up. He's going to find out we're looking. Not from the IT team, but from somewhere. He's been managing this too long and too carefully to not have eyes on the project room. She held his gaze. I know. When he does, she said, I need us to be further along than he expects. She paused. So don't slow down. He didn't. It was on Friday that things got complicated. Liam had come in early before most of the project floor had arrived to cross-reference the rebar specifications on the lower floor core walls against the POR records. He was deep in the documentation, the project room quiet around him, when the door opened without a knock and Marcus Hale walked in. Liam recognized him from the company website photograph. Taller in person. The silver-streaked hair and the executive presence were exactly as advertised. The manufactured ease of a man who moved through rooms as though they were already his. He looked at the papers spread across the table. Looked at Liam's legal pad. Then looked at Liam. Mr. Carter, he said. The warmth in the voice was impressive, genuine, adjacent, the kind that required real craft to produce. Liam closed the binder he was referencing. Slowly. Mr. Hale? I wanted to introduce myself. We haven't had the chance. Marcus sat down in the chair across from him, uninvited, with the ease of someone who never waited for invitations. I understand Victoria brought you on as an independent structural review. It's exactly the kind of due diligence this project needs, especially after the scaffold incident. I appreciate you saying so. How's the review going? Finding everything in order, I hope. Liam looked at him steadily. Marcus Hale's eyes up close were doing something that his face was not. They were moving across the table with a rapid cataloging attention that had nothing to do with making friendly conversation. I'm still early in the process, Liam said. Lots of documentation to work through. Of course, if you need anything, Anything at all, my office is happy to support the review. I can have Philip pull whatever you need from the financial side of things. That's generous. We're on the same team. Marcus smiled. We all want this building to be right. Absolutely, Liam said. A pause. Marcus glanced at the legal pad just once, quickly trying to read it from across the table. The handwriting was compressed and technical, and from that angle, unreadable. Well, Marcus said, standing, I'll let you get back to it. But let's grab coffee sometime this week. I'd love to hear your initial impressions. Sure, Liam said. Marcus walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, the practiced pause of a man who wanted the last thing said to be his. Oh, and Liam. Can I call you Liam? He didn't wait for an answer. I heard about what you did on the site, pulling Victoria off that scaffold. He shook his head with what looked like admiration. Hell of a thing. You've got good instincts. Thank you. I just hope your instincts serve you as well in here as they did out there. A smile. A nod. Have a good morning. He left. Liam sat without moving for a full 30 seconds. He could hear the project floor coming to life outside the glass conversations, starting phones ringing the ordinary machinery of a company that did not know what was buried in its own walls. He thought about the way Marcus had looked at the legal pad. The way instincts had landed in that last sentence, not quite a threat, but shaped like one. The way a man who's been careful for a very long time sounds when someone has gotten close enough that the careful starts to cost something. He took the second envelope from the project room filing cabinet and put it in his bag. Then he took out his phone and texted Victoria Hale just visited the project room. He was fishing. He knows something is happening. The reply came back in under a minute. How did he seem? Liam looked at the door where Marcus had stood. Thought about the eyes that didn't match the voice. Thought about the scaffold. Thought about a building full of people who had no idea how much the man managing their budget hated the idea of getting caught. He typed back, calm. That's the part that worries me. Her reply took a few seconds longer this time. Me too. Don't be alone in that room after hours. He looked at the response. Read it twice. It was the first time she'd said anything that broke the professional boundary, not much but enough to register. Not CEO to consultant. Something closer to one person warning another because the situation had graduated from professional to something that had real stakes for real people. He put his phone in his pocket, pulled the binder back open. The work was not done. The evidence was not complete. And Marcus Hale now knew that someone was looking. The clock that had always been running had just gotten louder. Liam picked up his pen and kept going. The weekend didn't slow Liam down. It just moved him to a different table. Saturday morning, Emma found him at the kitchen table at 6:45, with 4 legal pads spread out and a half-empty pot of coffee, and the particular look on his face that she'd started calling his building face, the one where his eyes were focused on something that wasn't in the room. She poured herself orange juice, stepped over his bag on the floor, and sat across from him without saying anything. She ate her cereal. He worked. After about 10 minutes, she said, "Is it getting worse or better?" He didn't look up. "What do you mean?" "Whatever you're figuring out. Is it getting worse or better the more you look at it?" He did look up then. She was watching him with those dark eyes over her cereal bowl, steady and patient. And for a moment, she looked so much like Rachel that it stopped his breath the way it sometimes did without warning, like a step you didn't expect at the bottom of a staircase. "Worse," he said honestly. She nodded like that was the answer she'd expected. "But you're still going?" "Yeah." "Good," she said, and went back to her cereal. He looked at her for a moment longer. This kid. This impossible, difficult, clear-eyed kid. He thought about the arrangement Victoria had drafted, the document Diane had given him Thursday morning, the one sitting in the locked file box under his bed, alongside Rachel's death certificate and Emma's birth certificate, and the things in his life that were too important for ordinary storage. He hadn't told Emma it existed. He didn't know if he should. What he knew was that it had changed something in him when he signed it. Not relief exactly. More like the particular settling that happens when you've secured something that needed to be secured, the way a properly torqued bolt changes the load distribution of everything connected to it. He went back to work. By Sunday evening, he had it. Not all of it, the full picture, would need the IT audit log that Victoria was working to extract, but enough. Enough to build a case that could withstand scrutiny from a structural engineer, a forensic accountant, and a district attorney in that order. He'd traced the material substitutions across 28 floors, cross-referenced the falsified digital records against the paper, manifests, and documented 4 separate instances where installation inspection reports had been signed off by an inspector whose license number, when he looked it up, belonged to a man who had died in 2021. A dead inspector signing off on active construction in 2023. He sat with that one for a long moment. Then he photographed everything, made 3 copies of the complete packet, sealed them, and distributed them the way a man distributes something that matters. 1 in his bag, 1 in the locked file box under the bed, and the one he drove across the city Sunday night after Emma was asleep, trusting Mrs. Pacheco with the listening ears, into the hands of the one person he trusted, who was entirely outside all of it. His former business partner, Danny Hollis, opened the door in pajama pants and a Steelers sweatshirt, looked at the sealed envelope Liam was holding, and said, "I was wondering when you were going to show up." "You knew." "I knew something. I've been watching that project from the outside for a year." Danny held the door open. "Come in. You look like you haven't slept since Thursday." "Friday." "Even worse. Get in here." Danny Hollis was 61, built like a man who'd spent his 20s doing physical work before moving into an office with a white beard he'd grown after retirement, and a mind that was still, in Liam's estimation, the sharpest structural engineering brain he'd ever encountered. He'd kept his license after Liam surrendered his. He'd kept the firm going for a year after Liam left, then closed it when the heart of it was gone, which was the kindest thing Danny had ever done for him, without either of them saying so. They sat at Danny's kitchen table, and Danny read the summary packet while Liam drank water and said nothing. Danny read slowly, which was his way. He processed everything at the speed of conviction rather than the speed of first impression. Twice he stopped and went back and reread a section. Once he made a sound low in his throat that was not a word, but communicated an entire paragraph. When he finished, he set the packet down and looked at Liam. "The dead inspector." "Yeah. That's not ambiguous, Liam. That's fraud. That's criminal fraud, not civil." "I know. This goes past building code violations, past wrongful construction practices. This is whoever built this documentation chain. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they did not care who got hurt." "I know." Danny was quiet for a moment. "Does Blackwell know the full scope?" "She knows most of it. She's working the financial side, the CFO's procurement approvals. This?" He nodded at the packet. "She doesn't have this yet. I wanted your eyes on it first, to make sure I wasn't—" "You're not," Danny said before he could finish. "You're not wrong. You're not overreading it, and you're not the maintenance man who should have kept his head down." He pushed the packet back toward Liam. "You're the structural engineer who designed the Meridian complex, and you know exactly what you're looking at." The words landed differently than Liam expected. Not as validation. He'd stopped needing validation about his own competence somewhere around the 4th legal pad. They landed like permission, like a door opening in a room he'd been standing outside of for 3 years. "I need you to hold that copy," Liam said, "in case something happens to mine." Danny looked at him for a long moment. "Something like what?" "Like Marcus Hale deciding that the most efficient way to manage a problem is to make the problem disappear." "Liam, I'm not being dramatic." "I know you're not." Danny stood and put the kettle on, which was his version of taking a moment. "That's why I'm worried." "Don't be worried," Liam said. "Be available. If I call, you pick up. If I don't call by Wednesday, call Victoria Blackwell's office and tell them you have a copy of a structural analysis prepared by Liam Carter on the Horizon Tower project, and that you'd like to discuss it with her directly. You're telling me to be a dead man switch. I'm telling you to be my partner, Liam said. Same as you always were. Danny stood at the counter while the kettle heated and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, you're going to want your license back when this is over. One thing at a time. No, I'm saying, Danny turned. When this is over, you're going to want it back. And I want you to actually want it back, not just for the work, for yourself. He paused. Rachel would have wanted you in a building doing math, not mopping floors. You know that. The name dropped into the room with the weight it always carried, and the gentleness that Danny always managed to carry it with, which was why Danny was one of maybe 3 people in the world Liam allowed to say it at all. I know, Liam said. Okay. Danny poured the tea. Then go do what you need to do and call me by Wednesday. Monday morning, Victoria met him in the project room at 7:30 with the IT audit log. She set a USB drive on the table and looked at it the way you look at something you've been carrying for a while without knowing how heavy it was. Our IT compliance officer pulled it last night. Board Audit Committee authority. Marcus can't touch it without creating a paper trail that would flag the audit committee directly. Did he know it was being pulled? No, but he will. System access requests are logged, and Philip reviews those logs for Marcus every Tuesday morning. She sat down. That gives us until tomorrow morning before he knows we have it. That's not much time. No. She looked at him. What else did you find over the weekend? He laid out the dead inspector findings. Walked her through it the way he'd walked Danny through it, methodically, cleanly. Not softening anything, because the facts didn't need softening, and she didn't need protecting from them. She was completely still for the duration. When he finished, she stood and walked to the window and looked out at the city for about 20 seconds, and he let her. A dead man, she said without turning around. License number 4471-B. Vincent Perello. Died March 14, 2021. His license number appears on 14 inspection reports on this project, all signed after that date. She turned back to face him. Marcus couldn't have done this alone. You need someone inside the inspection process, someone with access to the license database who could use a dead man's number without it flagging. Agreed. There's a second signature on 3 of the reports, secondary approval, different handwriting. I haven't traced it yet. I have someone who can run it. She was already thinking 3 moves ahead. He could see at the mind that ran a billion-dollar company reorganizing itself in real time, redirecting resources, recalculating the position. Not through normal channels. Someone on the board's legal counsel. Do it fast, he said. Because there's something else. She waited. This isn't the first project. A pause. What do you mean? The documentation pattern, the way the substitutions are structured, the way the paper records are buried, the specific inspection bypass method, it's too practiced, too refined. Someone built this system through repetition. He held her gaze. I think Horizon Tower is at least the 3rd time Marcus has done this. Maybe more. The color in her face didn't change, but something behind it did, the specific shift that happens when a person realizes the problem is not the size they thought it was. I have 2 other major Blackwell projects from the past 6 years, she said slowly. The Keller Center. The Riverside Residential Complex. I'd need access to their documentation. You'll have it. Her voice was flat and certain. I'll pull the archived records today. Victoria. She looked at him. People live in the Riverside complex. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, opened them. I know. If the structural deficiencies there are comparable to Horizon. I know Liam. She said his name the way she said it when she was using it to ground herself, rather than address him as a fixed point. We're not going to let that happen. That's what this is. He nodded. He believed her. He believed her not because he was naive, or because she was powerful, or because she'd been kind to Emma on paper. He believed her because he'd watched her hold still under the weight of what he'd told her without deflecting, without minimizing, without looking for an angle. She was scared he could see it, the controlled version of it, the kind that competent people carry like a hidden structural load, and she was moving anyway. That was the only kind of courage that had ever meant anything to him. Tuesday arrived with a specific and identifiable shift in the air on the 14th floor. Liam felt it when he got in at 7. The project team moving differently, a fraction more careful, a fraction more aware of being watched. 2 people in a conversation that stopped when he walked past. Diane meeting his eyes in the elevator with a look that was reading him for information. He went straight to the project room. Victoria was already there. She looked like she hadn't slept, which he recognized because he wore the same thing on his own face most mornings. Philip ran the log review early, she said without preamble. So Marcus knows. He knows the audit log was pulled. He doesn't know who has it or what we've found. She sat. He called me at 6:15 this morning. What did he say? That he was concerned about the scope of the review, that he felt the board should be involved before any findings were formalized, that he'd like to schedule a call with the chair of the audit committee to ensure. She paused, her jaw tightening slightly. Quote, proper governance and due process. He's trying to control the venue, Liam said. Get ahead of the findings by framing them as a governance dispute instead of a fraud investigation. Yes. She looked at him. He's also very good at it. He's been managing the board's audit committee chair for years, Stuart Weiss. They golf together. They've had dinner at Stuart's house. If Marcus gets to Weiss before we complete the analysis, then the committee chair goes into the conversation preloaded, and our evidence gets characterized as a disgruntled employee and a CEO who overstepped her authority to undermine a senior executive. Liam looked at her steadily. How much time do we have before he gets to Weiss? I called Weiss at 6:45. I told him I'm preparing a formal findings presentation and I need 48 hours before any committee conversations happen. She paused. He agreed. He owes me one different story, different day, but the 48 hours is real. Then we need to be done in 48 hours. Yes. They looked at each other across the table with the specific understanding of 2 people who have just agreed to do something that is going to cost them both a great deal of effort and carry no guarantee of outcome. I'll need the Keller Center and Riverside archives, he said. They're already on the drive. He pulled his laptop toward him and got to work. Marcus Hale spent Tuesday morning being very calm and very deliberate, which was how he spent every morning that required it. He had Philip compile the complete personnel file on Liam Carter, every document associated with his employment on the Blackwell site, every incident report, every supervisor note. He read it twice. He noted the flagged maintenance report from 3 days before the scaffold failure, the one Dale had received and not escalated. He noted the scaffold incident statement. He noted the consulting engagement letter, which was frustratingly clean. Then he made 2 phone calls from his personal cell, not his office line, walking through the building's parking structure, where there were no interior cameras. The first call was short. The second was shorter. When he came back upstairs, he stopped by Philip's desk. I need you to pull the project room access logs for the past 2 weeks. Physical keycard swipes, printer usage records, and document checkout. All of it. All of it. And Philip quietly, not through the main IT request system. Talk to the building security desk, directly tell them it's for an internal audit. Philip didn't ask why. That was his most useful quality. Marcus went into his office and closed the door and sat for a moment with his hands flat on his desk, breathing slowly. He was not panicked. He had been in situations that required management before, and he had managed them. This was a more complex situation than most, but complexity was navigable if you kept your composure and moved faster than the people who were looking for you. What concerned him was not the evidence. Evidence could be contextualized, challenged, routed through friendly channels. What concerned him was the man who'd assembled it, a structural engineer who'd spent 3 years walking the bones of that building, who had no financial stake, no corporate position, no vulnerability that Marcus had been able to identify in the 2 phone calls he'd just made. Except one. He opened his desk drawer and looked at the folder Philip had left. Emma Grace Carter, age 11. Willowbrook. Elementary school homeroom teacher. Ms. Kwan, after-school care. Tuesdays and Thursdays picked up by Father Liam Carter. Registered vehicle A, 2009. Chevrolet Silverado license plate. He closed the folder. He wasn't going to use that. He wasn't that kind of man. He told himself this clearly and with conviction, and almost entirely believed it. But he put the folder in his briefcase rather than the shredder. Liam had been looking at the Keller Center records for 3 hours when the project room door opened and a man he didn't recognize walked in. Mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, the kind of face that had learned not to give things away. A visitor badge clipped to a jacket that fit well enough to be intentional. "Mr. Carter?" Liam looked up. "I don't know you." "No." The man sat down uninvited in the chair across the table, the same chair Marcus had used on Friday, and Liam registered that placement with a precise and particular discomfort. "My name isn't important. I represent certain interests that overlap with this project. You're going to need to be more specific than that." "Mr. Hale is concerned," the man said with the careful neutrality of a translator working between 2 languages. "He feels the current review process is creating unnecessary disruption at a sensitive project stage. He'd like to offer an alternative path." Liam set his pen down. He looked at this man, at the careful language, the visitor badge, the jacket, and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but was made of the same materials. What alternative path? The review concludes. Findings are summarized as minor specification variances within acceptable engineering tolerances. Corrective action plan implemented by the existing engineering team. The man paused. "Mr. Carter's consulting engagement concludes with a full fee payout, which I'm told is a generous number, and a strong professional recommendation letter suitable for license reinstatement applications." Silence. Liam looked at this man for a long moment. He thought about 14 inspection reports signed by a dead man. He thought about 4,200 pounds of scaffold hitting the ground. He thought about the Riverside complex, with people living in it, sleeping in it, bringing their children home to it. He thought about Emma's voice. "Then what does that make you?" "No," he said. The man's expression didn't change. "Mr. Carter, no." He said it the same way the second time, the same weight, the same complete absence of negotiation. "Tell Marcus Hale that I know what's in that building. Tell him I know it's not the first time. And tell him that the only path forward that doesn't end in a federal courtroom is for him to get ahead of this himself." He paused. "That offer expires when I finish what I'm working on." The man stood, looked at Liam with an expression that had developed a slight edge, not threatening, but no longer neutral. "You understand the position you're putting yourself in." "I understand the position Marcus Hale put himself in," Liam said. "I'm just the one who found out about it." The man left. Liam waited until the door was fully closed. Then he picked up his phone and called Victoria. She answered in one ring. "I'm in a meeting with..." "Marcus just sent someone to the project room to offer me a buyout." A beat. Then with controlled intensity, "Are you serious?" "He knows we're close. He's trying to cut it off." Liam's voice was steady. "Victoria, it needs to be tonight. Not 48 hours. Tonight." He heard her exhale. He heard the quality of the silence on her end, the sound of a person reorganizing everything at speed. "I'll call Weiss directly," she said. "Emergency board briefing this evening. Can you have the full report ready by 6? He looked at the materials spread across the table. The Keller Center findings. The Riverside preliminary analysis. The Horizon Tower documentation. 3 legal pads, deep cross-referenced and annotated and ready. "Yes," he said. "Then I'll handle the board end. You build the case." A pause. Liam, don't let him rattle you. He didn't, Liam said. But he tried, which means he's scared. And scared people do things they wouldn't normally do. Then we move faster than he does. Yes. He hung up. Pulled the Keller Center file back in front of him. For the next 4 hours, Liam Carter did what he had always been built to do. He took a complex system apart, understood exactly what was wrong with it, and documented every failure point with the clean, unsparing precision of someone who knows that the building does not care about your feelings about what you find. The building only cares whether you're honest about what you find. He was honest. By 5:45, the report was done. He sealed it in 3 copies. Put his phone in his pocket. Looked at the table at the neat completed stack of documentation that represented 3 weeks of work and 3 years of built-up instinct and 15 years of skill that had never actually left, no matter how long he'd pretended otherwise. He thought about something Danny had said Sunday night in the kitchen. You're going to want your license back when this is over. He picked up his bag. He took the elevator up to Victoria's floor. The clock was running. Marcus Hale was running, and Liam Carter was not going to be the man who looked the other way. He hadn't been able to be that man on the scaffold, and he couldn't be that man now. Maybe that was a flaw. Maybe it was the thing that had always set him apart, and apart was another word for alone sometimes. But Emma was right. He knew what he knew, and that meant he had to do something about it. He knocked on Victoria's office door. "Come in," she said. He did. Victoria's office at 5:45 had the quality of a room where a decision has already been made and is simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. She was on the phone when Liam came in, standing at the window with her back to the door, and she held up one finger without turning around, not dismissively, but the way you signal someone you trust that you need 60 more seconds. He set the report on her desk and sat down and waited. "Stuart, I understand your concern. What I need you to understand is that this is not a governance dispute, and it is not an internal personnel matter." A pause. "Yes, tonight. 8 o'clock. My office." Another pause, shorter. "Stuart, 9 years ago when the Alderman Street project went sideways, and you needed someone to stand between you and the board who made that call." She listened. "Then I need you to be in this room at 8 o'clock. She hung up, turned around, looked at the report on her desk, then at him. "Weiss is in," she said. "Good. He's not happy about it. He doesn't need to be happy. He needs to be there." She sat down, picked up the report. He watched her read the executive summary, 2 pages dense, the kind of writing that didn't waste a word, because there wasn't a word to waste. He'd written it the way he'd written engineering reports his entire career. Every claim substantiated, every reference cited, every conclusion drawn from documented fact rather than inference. She finished the summary, set it down. The Riverside Complex. Preliminary findings are in Section 4. The structural deficiencies are less severe than Horizon. Marcus apparently got more careful with the documentation as the schemes evolved, but there are column connection issues on floors 3 and 7 that need immediate evaluation. People are living there right now. Yes. After tonight, regardless of how the board meeting goes, I'm pulling in an independent structural team for emergency assessment. She said it like a commitment made to herself, not a statement for his benefit. No one sleeps in that building until we know it's safe. He nodded. There's something else you need to know before tonight. She looked at him. The man who came to the project room this afternoon, Marcus's representative. He mentioned an alternative path. Liam paused. He knew details about my consulting engagement that aren't in any public document. Fee structure. The professional recommendation clause. He let that sit for a moment. Someone on the inside gave him that. Victoria went very still. You think he has someone on the project floor? I think he's had someone on the project floor for a while. Someone who's been watching the review from the beginning. Philip, she said. Not a question, a conclusion arrived at with the speed of a person who'd been carrying a suspicion they hadn't allowed themselves to name. I can't confirm that. I can. She picked up her phone, typed something, set it back down. I had Diane flag Philip's building access this afternoon. He badged into the project room last Thursday evening after 6. You were gone by then. He read the legal pads. Some of them. Enough to report back. She exhaled slowly. Marcus has been 10 steps ahead of me for 9 years because someone on this floor has been telling him where I'm going before I get there. The anger in her voice was the controlled kind, the kind that had been there long enough to become fuel rather than heat. Not anymore. She stood, walked to the door, opened it, and said to Diane with a quietness that carried more authority than volume. Get security up here and find Philip. Tell him I need him in the conference room immediately. She came back in, sat down, looked at Liam with an expression that had moved past anger into something cleaner and harder. Let's go over the presentation, she said. We have 2 hours. Marcus Hale knew by 6:30. He knew because Philip didn't answer his phone. He knew because Philip's building access showed an outbound badge at 6:17, not a normal end-of-day departure, but the specific trajectory of a man who'd been asked to leave a room and had complied, which meant someone had found something. He sat in his car in the parking structure and thought carefully for 3 minutes. He'd built his career on 3-minute decisions, on the ability to assess a situation at speed and commit to a course of action before the window closed. It had served him very well. The window was closing now. He could let this run. Present himself to the board meeting as a cooperative executive with concerns about process. Bring his own documentation, his own framing challenge, the credibility of an unlicensed consultant working from handwritten legal pads. Stuart Weiss was a reasonable man, and a cautious one, and reasonable, cautious men preferred the narrative that required the least disruption. But Marcus knew what was in that report. He'd had enough time and enough sources to know that Liam Carter had found everything. The dead inspector, the Keller Center, the Riverside Complex, the procurement chain that led clearly and without ambiguity to his approval signatures. He made a decision. He drove to the server room. Liam was reviewing the presentation slides with Victoria when his phone buzzed. A text from Danny Building Access Records just forwarded to me from your friend at the board legal team. Marcus Hale badged into the B2 server room at 6:44 p.m. He's not cleared for that space after hours. He read it twice, showed it to Victoria. She was on her feet before he'd finished reading. The digital project records. All of them, the modified procurement files, the altered inspection reports, the version history that shows the original entries before he changed them. Everything is stored on the primary project server in B2. He's going to wipe it, Liam said. We have the paper manifests. The paper manifests prove material substitution. The digital audit log proves he personally altered records after the fact. Without it, his lawyers argue the modifications were legitimate administrative corrections. He was already standing, already moving toward the door. Victoria, the audit log is the chain of custody. Without it, we have evidence of a problem. With it, we have evidence of a crime. She grabbed her keycard. B2 is 2 floors below ground. My card gets me through the first security door. The server room itself requires an additional badge, either a tech authorization or an executive override. Do you have the override? My father had it built into the CEO keycard. She was already at the elevator. I've never used it. Use it tonight. The B2 level was quiet, the way infrastructure spaces are always quiet. A functional silence, the hum of servers and cooling systems, the sound of the building thinking. The fluorescent overheads made everything look surgical and slightly unreal. Marcus was at the primary server terminal when they came through the door. He turned at the sound of it, and the look on his face in that first unguarded second was the most honest thing Liam had ever seen from him. Surprise, calculation, and then the practiced composure coming back down like a blind. "Victoria." He said it with warmth. He actually said it with warmth. "I can explain what—" "Don't," she said. Just that one word, flat and final. He looked at Liam. Something passed across his face that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite respect, the look of a man acknowledging an opponent he hadn't fully anticipated. "You found more than I expected," Marcus said. "I usually do," Liam said. "The janitor with the engineering degree." Marcus shook his head slightly. "You know what's interesting about you, Carter? You had every reason to stay out of this. No standing, no license, a daughter to think about." He paused. "And you walked in anyway." "Step away from the terminal, Marcus." He didn't move. "I've already initiated the deletion sequence on the version history. 40 seconds and the audit log is gone. You can arrest me with what you have left, circumstantial documentation and paper manifest that my lawyers will spend 2 years contextualizing." He looked at Victoria. "And in the meantime, every project Blackwell Enterprises has in progress comes under regulatory review. The stock takes a hit. It won't recover from in this cycle. And everything your father built." "Everything my father built," Victoria said, stepping forward, "was built on the assumption that the people he trusted would act with integrity. That's the only part of his legacy I care about protecting." She walked past Marcus to the terminal. He moved to block her, not physically, but positionally, the way a man uses his size to communicate a boundary, and Liam stepped forward and put himself between them, not aggressively, just present, just an immovable fact in the space. Marcus looked at him. "I have a daughter," Liam said quietly. "You're right, and she's the reason I'm standing in this room, not despite her, because of her. Because I'm not going to be the man who looked the other way when a building was going to hurt somebody and then looked her in the face every morning." Something moved behind Marcus Hale's eyes. Not remorse. He wasn't built for remorse. Or if he had been once, the years had renovated it into something else. But something. The specific acknowledgement that a man makes when he understands that the person across from him cannot be bought or frightened, and that category of person has always been the one he could never fully account for. He stepped aside. Victoria reached past him and hit the abort sequence on the terminal. The deletion countdown stopped at 11 seconds. Then she looked at Marcus with the full, undecorated weight of who she was and what she had just found out about him. "You tried to kill me," she said. "On that scaffold. You knew I'd be there." Marcus said nothing. "That's not a question," she said, "and it's not a conversation." She pulled out her phone and called building security. Then she called the board's legal counsel. Then, without hesitation or drama, she called the FBI field office, whose number the board's legal team had given her 45 minutes ago during their briefing call, because the legal counsel had been very clear that what Liam's report described crossed the threshold from civil fraud to federal criminal territory, and that the right call was the one that left no procedural gaps for a man with good lawyers to exploit. Marcus sat down in a server room chair and folded his hands in his lap and waited, and the composure he wore while doing it was the saddest thing in the room. Sadder than the crime. Sadder than the cost of it, because it was the composure of a man who had been performing integrity for so long that he'd forgotten what the real thing felt like. And now, at the bottom of everything, the performance was all he had left. The board meeting happened anyway at 8 o'clock with Stuart Weiss and 3 other committee members and the board's legal counsel and a federal agent who sat quietly in the corner and took notes. Liam presented the findings from the report floor by floor, document by document, with the measured delivery of someone who has organized chaos into sequence, because that is what engineers do. He answered questions for 40 minutes. He was not nervous. He had stopped being nervous when he walked out of that elevator 3 weeks ago and felt the ground under his feet differently. Weiss asked him at one point how long he'd been aware of the structural deficiencies. "I flagged the east scaffold anchor to my site supervisor 3 days before it failed," Liam said. "The first time I identified potential systemic issues was the night after the scaffold incident. I drew the initial analysis from memory on a legal pad at my kitchen table." Weiss looked at him for a moment. "You were the maintenance technician at the time." I was. And you drew a structural analysis from memory. I was a structural engineer for 15 years, Liam said. That doesn't go away. It just goes quiet for a while. Weiss looked at Victoria. She looked back at him with an expression that communicated cleanly and without embellishment that this was not the moment for skepticism. All right, Weiss said. Let's talk about remediation. Marcus Hale was arrested at 9:47 that evening in the building lobby by 2 federal agents. The charges, which Liam would read about the following morning in the kind of news alert that makes your coffee taste different, included wire fraud, falsification of federal construction documents, and conspiracy to obstruct a safety investigation. A 4th charge added after the digital audit log was fully analyzed was the one that would follow him the longest criminal endangerment in connection with the knowing approval of substandard structural components in occupied and occupied pending buildings. Philip Tran cooperated with investigators within 36 hours, which was faster than even Marcus's lawyers expected, and which collapsed the deniability architecture that Marcus had spent 9 years constructing with such careful, patient craft. 2 weeks later, Liam picked Emma up from school on a Tuesday, and they drove to the Riverside complex together. He parked across the street, and they sat in the Silverado and looked at the building's 6 floors, brick and glass, 42 residential units, most of them dark at this hour, with the particular warmth of people home for the evening, living their lives in a building that had been quietly failing around them without their knowledge. "Is it fixed now?" Emma asked. "The emergency assessment is done. The column connections on 3 and 7 they're being reinforced starting next week. The residents have been notified. No one's in danger." But they were. They were. She looked at the building for a long moment. And they didn't know. No. That's the scariest part, she said. Not knowing something's wrong when it is. He looked at his daughter, at the dark eyes and the clear, unsentimental way she had of naming things that most adults spent years learning to name. "Yeah," he said. "That's the scariest part." She turned to look at him. "Are you going to get your license back?" He'd been thinking about it since Danny said it in the kitchen. Since Victoria had said in the board meeting without preface that Blackwell Enterprises would be formally sponsoring the reinstatement petition. Since he'd found himself 2 days ago looking at the Horizon Tower drawings not as evidence but as a problem to be solved, a building that could be made right, that could be made safe, that could become what it was supposed to be. "I'm working on it," he said. "Good." She looked back at the building. "Mom would have wanted you to." He didn't answer right away. Sat with that the way you sit with things that are true and important, and cost you something to acknowledge. The Silverado's engine ticked in the cooling evening air. Somewhere in the Riverside complex, behind a lit window on the 4th floor, a shadow moved through a room ordinary and unaware and safe. "Yeah," he said finally. She would have. Emma reached over and patted his arm twice, brisk. Practical, the gesture of someone who has delivered what needed to be delivered and considers the matter closed. Then, she opened the glove compartment, found the granola bar she'd put there 3 days ago, and apparently forgotten about, and started eating it. "Can we get tacos?" she said. He laughed. It came out of him the way laughter does when you've been carrying a heavy load for a long time, and your body finds an unguarded moment to remind you what it feels like to set it down. Real and unguarded, and a little rough around the edges. "Yeah," he said. "We can get tacos." A month after the board meeting, Victoria Blackwell and Liam Carter stood side by side on the 14th floor of Horizon Tower. Not the project room, not the executive suite, but the actual structure itself. The open framework of the east face, where the scaffold had fallen, and where the remediation crew was now installing the correct hardware, the right grade, the bolts that would actually hold what they were meant to hold. Victoria was in a hard hat and sight boots, and a blazer that was already getting dusty, and she was looking at the column connection the crew had just exposed, the old hardware laid out on the floor beside the new, the difference visible to anyone who knew what they were looking at. "It's smaller than I expected," she said. "The difference." The wrong bolt and the right bolt look almost identical, Liam said. That's the whole thing. The whole scheme depends on the fact that most people can't tell the difference just by looking. But you can. Yes. She looked at the bolt in her hand, the old one, the wrong one, the one that had been in that column since floor 4. She turned it over once. I want you to stay, she said. Not as a consultant, as lead structural engineer on the remediation, and then on whatever comes next. You're doing this while standing on a construction site with dust on your jacket. I've found it's the best place to have honest conversations. He looked out at the city through the open framework at the distances and the structures and the 1,000 buildings standing on the work of engineers who had built them right or wrong, who had kept their heads down, or hadn't, who had known the difference between the two bolts and had done something about it, or hadn't. I'll need my license reinstated before it's official, he said. The petition was filed last week. I have 2 board members writing letters. She paused. Danny Hollis sent one without being asked. He looked at her. She looked back with the expression she'd been developing over the past month. Not the CEO expression, not the composed for public consumption expression, but the one that showed up in working rooms and difficult conversations, the one that meant she was actually present in the room with the person she was talking to. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll stay. Okay, I'll stay. She nodded. Put the bolt in her jacket pocket, not as evidence, not for documentation, just as the thing it was. A small, unremarkable piece of metal that stood for everything a person could get wrong when they decided that corners were cuttable and people were acceptable losses. The remediation crew went back to work above them, the sound of correct installation filling the space where failure had lived, and the building that had been quietly breaking began bolt by bolt and floor by floor, the long and unglamorous work of becoming what it should have been from the start. That was how it ended. Not with a speech, not with a ceremony, but with 2 people standing in a building under repair, both of them knowing what it had cost to get there, and neither of them looking away. Some things get built to collapse. Some things get built to stand. Liam Carter had spent 3 years disappearing, and 1 month proving that the difference between those 2 things was never the building. It was always the person who refused to sign off on the lie.